The challenge is how many people do you know who have sold their company that are unhappy? Poor guy just had stomach cancer last year, had his stomach removed, and he made it through.
Wow.
Yeah, made it through. Has no stomach. The overweight young man who's in his 20s who plays video games every day and is depressed. When you hear that analogy, what's your judgment? But if you don't put everything into it, you don't learn anything because you don't know what it was that caused you not to accomplish the goal. And that is where so many people miss the mark. That the only way I can possibly get to the point where I like what's on there is going through this process.
Yeah.
If you release your product and you look back on it and you don't feel a little bit ashamed of it, you waited.
Steve, welcome to the show.
Craig, thanks for having me.
Glad you could come up. I'm glad we found each other.
I'm excited to be here.
Perfect. So, Steve, you're, part of your past is you've been to the Olympics. You have a gold medal from the Olympics.
There was a time.
Which Olympics did you actually get the gold medal in?
2010, Vancouver Olympics.
Oh, okay. So it took you a little while to warm up.
Yeah, you had to earn it.
That's excellent. Cool. And now since then, so you're, 15-ish years past your Olympic career, I guess. Do we call it a career?
Yeah.
Is it a career?
Yeah, it was 10 years of not doing anything else.
Yeah, that's wild, eh?
Yeah.
Wow. And now you're doing some executive coaching, you're speaking, you're living the high life of...
It will create the itinerary for you.
Not doing the thing that you do every day. Not waking
Grinding.
up to...
I still grind.
I still grind, but not waking up to the responsibilities of running an entire organization anymore.
Yeah.
So I did that for a dozen plus
Did
years.
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So take us back to, I think some people find it fascinating that anyone ever gets to the Olympics. So did you always want to be an Olympian?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always thought I wanted to.
Yeah.
To say it was the thing I was going to do. It's when you're a kid, it's kind of a dream, just like anything else. But I started doing Junior Olympics track and field when I was 11. So the dream kind of took hold right around 11 years old.
Was there when you first started, competing in any kind of sport, was there a person on the Wheaties box? Who was the person that you were like, whoa, that's the guy?
It was Dan O'Brien. So if you remember that, Dan versus Dave, being the American here. Yeah. I've been in Calgary now for 22 years, so kids are duels and all those things. But back then, it was the Dan versus Dave, that Reebok commercial, who's the world's greatest athlete,
right? Would
have been, when we were young. And that was the thing that got me into, I had just started track and field, but I started track and field in 1990, and that ad campaign was the 92 Summer Olympic ad campaign. Wow. So Dan was the man.
Wow. And for me, it was Bruce Jenner. Ever since I was really young, that was the guy.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So it was just, a generation. We're just
just a different
but we're literally just a slight generation past. Yep.
That's wild, hey? Yeah, that's interesting when you have those kinds of people that kind of push you to be successful. So
yeah.
Pretty wild. So then you were in the 2002 Olympics. That was your first Olympics. Yeah. Where was that one?
Salt Lake City.
That was Salt Lake City.
So it was home. It was 5 months after 9/11. So it was quite the experience to share that with the Canadians as I was training here in Calgary from 2003 until 2010, and leading up to the Vancouver Olympics, I could share with the Canadian athletes because we trained with Americans and Canadians trained together in bobsled. And we could talk a lot about what that's like and what that's going to be like. And for us in 2002, it was a whole different experience because the whole world, let alone the Western culture, hadn't breathed really since 9/11 happened. It was the first time we all celebrated together.
Yeah. And I know, not to derail what we're talking about, but it's interesting, though, that when I remember so clearly back to that 9/11 time frame, that epoch. And it was interesting because one of the things that you do get into is the mental health things, conversations. And it was fascinating then that 9/11 exposed, it kind of peeled off a bit of the veneer for a lot of people who, had some underlying struggles, really. And I remember at work on that day, we had we were in Calgary, probably no one's really that concerned. We're not on the map for most of the rest of the world. And there was an awful lot of people that were really hit hard by it, and they couldn't work. They were really traumatized. It was fascinating.
It was scary. I mean, it was scary, right? It was almost this, if New York City could get hit in that way, then any of it. I remember I was living at the I was in the Olympic Training Center, and the U.S. has a couple Olympic training centers across the country, and we were down in Chula Vista outside of San Diego that morning. So we were a few hours behind. So I woke up and the first building had already been hit. and then everybody gathered in the cafeteria there and watched the rest of the day. I remember my cousins who were, my mom's side was from New York City, just outside New York City. And my cousin at the time was Zach. I vividly remember him. He was young at that point. Zach had to be maybe 10, give or take. Not, 8, 9, 10 at that age. Right around the age of my daughter right now. And he was really scared. He was really scared because if they could hit the towers, they could hit his school.
Yeah.
So, for kids like that and the same, but it cascades up. The adults still have that feeling.
Yeah, that's vulnerability. It's weird, like a societal trauma.
Yeah.
And I guess it would have been the same during any of the major world wars or big war events would have been.
And then COVID was like, so every now and then those things happen where everybody gets, my old role at Costume Champions, we looked at a lot of like ACE scores. They're like in first childhood events, which is basically anything bad / traumatic in any way. It could be your parents getting into a giant fight to something happening externally like 9/11 or witnessing something that's traumatic. Every time you have one of those, they add up. And basically if you have more than I'm rusty on the numbers, but if you have more than 5 or 6, you are much more likely to have, depends on drugs and alcohol when you're older, much more likely. All the outcomes from bad income to like lack of education to disease. Yeah. When you literally to disease as you get older. So it's kind of like 9/11 gave us, everybody got a +1 in North America.
Right. Yeah.
COVID, everybody got at least a +1.
Yeah.
Because kids saw the fear of their parents or the fear on television. So those things are interesting.
Or people dying even, like they may have had grandparents pass away or
things like that. Yeah. So it's going to be the COVID situation is going to be interesting to see, right? Like what happens when you give a +1 or +2 to basically most of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that generations, like when we look at generational theory, like when everyone's like Gen Zs, Gen X, and for the most part, most people don't even have much clue of when those things existed. But for the most part, there's something societal that has to happen for that to become a generation. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no distinguishable thing between one age group and another. Right?
Where do you lie?
I'm X. Yeah. I'm at the end of X, technically speaking.
See, maybe you're at the beginning of X. I'm at the X of it. I'm at the end of X.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like 80. It's like that crossover between X and...
Yeah. It would be kind of the beginning of computers is when you have that next generation comes up.
Yeah.
So that's wild. Pretty wild. And so you were, going back now, you were at the Olympics and it was bobsled.
Yeah.
So, and most people have no clue. Bobsled's just like when we take our toboggan out to the hill and go down.
Just like that. Just like that. I got to spend my 20s sliding down mountains, wearing tights, traveling the world.
Yeah.
That was, it's
pretty wild.
As I look back, it was a really incredible way to spend adulthood.
Yeah.
Living the Olympic dream in a different way than I ever thought I would. Yeah. And it was not on the radar. I was a track athlete, and I was a national champion in high school in the U.S., and I was going to University of Florida, and that was the path I was on. And then a bunch of injuries at Florida derailed that, and I had a coach who had a guy who went from track to bobsled, so he kind of mentioned it one time, and that was in my ear. The bug was in my ear as I was having my 5th year of a row of injuries in college. That was the reason that...
Were they injuries from overtraining or from...
No, just like acute. It was hamstring at the end of my senior year in high school.
Yeah.
It was ankle, and then it was elbow, Tommy John surgery at the end of that. And a couple days out of Tommy John surgery, I realized that my dream was dead. And I just thought, I don't want to think I peaked when I was 17 years old. You hit these everybody hits these moments in their life where you realize the thing you wanted to do, you might not be able to do.
Yeah. And
we all have them. Sometimes it's athletics, sometimes it's school, sometimes it's a career. But we hit these moments where it dawns on us that this isn't going to happen for us.
The sun is set on that part of life somehow.
Yeah. And I just refused to believe that I peaked when I was 17. So I got my computer out, and I had this coach that had his, in the back of my head from a couple years early compared me to another athlete. And I took out my left hand, my bad hand, and emailed the U.S. Olympic Committee and said, to whom it may concern, I'm this big, I'm this strong, I'm this fast. Can I do this? And I got an email back the next day, and it's kind of one of those lessons of, I look back at that 22-year-old kid who was scared, scared as could be on his couch. His dream was dead. Wow. And he made a decision to not accept that.
Not lay down.
Not accept it. And I'm really, I'm so proud of him when I look back at it.
Life-changing.
It's just, he's a different human being than I am today. Yeah. I've got kids, I've got all these other responsibilities, but as I look back at that, and it's, I'm inspired by him.
Yeah.
Now, and I have made a couple of changes like that in my life throughout it, and that really was like one of the first times that I really made that kind of directional change, but also had the self-awareness and brought it back and just said, okay, what hasn't been working, and what do I need to do to possibly make it work? Because I thought I was doing all the things.
Yeah.
You think you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And those things work for a lot of people, but sometimes they just don't work for you. But you keep doing the same thing because you're told that's the thing you should do. And that kid decided no. And the best thing about that email, the day after we went to a guy named Greg Sand at U.S. Olympic Committee, sent it on to USA Bobsled.
Wow.
That day. And literally the next day, I got an email back from Greg Sand saying this.
Wild.
Yeah, and 10 years later, I am sitting at the Olympic Village in Vancouver, because we were up in Whistler for bobsled, but they brought us down because we were on the Today Show the day after we won in the U.S. And the next day I was waking up in the Olympic Village. It was going to be my last day there. It was my last Olympics. I knew it was going to be my last Olympics. And I opened up my inbox, and Greg forwarded me that email.
No way.
So the day after, effectively a day after, I lived the dream that I didn't even think was possible. You don't think it's actually possible to win a gold medal.
Yeah.
I read this email from this kid, terrible grammar at the time. This scared kid sitting on the couch in Gainesville was like, and I just started bawling at that moment. Just started, and I had then opened up another one, and the Buffalo News, my hometown paper, wrote this really amazing paper, a really amazing article on my win. And the Bucky Gleason, the guy who was the writer at the Buffalo News at the time, he and I had a strong relationship.
Yeah.
And I had always said, look, man, if you could, it's not your job to do anything for me. Yeah. But if you could do one thing, I want the people in Buffalo to feel like they won.
Yeah.
I was a kid who grew up through 4 Super Bowls of losses, and Buffalo is the it's the ongoing joke from snow to 4 Super Bowl losses to all these things. It's like I want people and I want kids in Buffalo to feel like they won. Yeah. And literally the headline of the article was something along the lines of something to the effect of Mesler's win, a win for us all.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. Did you have a good support group around you as you were coming up into these things? Like I think sometimes that helps. Like you get a lot of people that are probably unbelievable athletes, but they don't have any support group.
Yeah.
And then they just get lost.
I did the whole, and that's eventually where Classroom Champions, the nonprofit and charity that my sister and I started. Eventually, the root of it was that. I was fortunate. I came through. And sure, I was from Buffalo, New York, the 3rd poorest city in America. Yeah. And my parents were teachers. We weren't, we were, solidly middle class in a blue collar middle class, lower class city. But I had coaches who identified me as talented and didn't charge my parents and had me come out to the suburban high school from the inner city high school. And luckily I had Coach Mike Weck who kind of he recognized I was beyond his capabilities to coach.
Yeah.
The talent that I had was showing in the work ethic and skills that I had at the time.
Yeah.
So he let me just kind of be a part of the high school team there and then jive out to the suburbs. Yeah. And that's where I got my coach. So I had those people.
And at that point you were multi-event.
I was a multi-event. So I was I was like a dream high school athlete because there's no decathlon on a regular meet basis.
You still do all the events.
You still do it. You could put me in whoever he needed to beat that thing. He could put me in. And even in the city in Buffalo, I was the fast white guy,
right?
That ran the 100 and the hurdles and all the long jumped and all those things. Just much like yourself in your decathlon career, I'm sure.
It's almost exactly what my career was like.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. And
and then high school.
And then to college, I had a couple great coaches, and I had a couple coaches that were really hard. I got kicked out of the training room my 4th year in Florida because I was just hurt all the time and I was taking up too many resources. I literally got kicked out of the training. I was not allowed anymore. So not only was the dream dead, the faith of the people around me was dead.
Yeah.
So I should not have gone on and done what I did. And then when I got out of there, I wound up moved to Calgary for a guy named Stu McMillan, who was actually just on the Huberman Lab podcast just a few weeks ago. Wow. He went on to coach Andre DeGrasse and others. One of the best sprint coaches, literally one of the best sprint coaches in the world. So I had him around me. So I always had these people. And then going Classroom Champions, I had a guy named Dave Pottruck, who was our board chair for 10 years. Dave was the CEO of Charles Schwab from the mid-90s to mid-2000s. Really? Wow. And when you think about Schwab was the first company, in essence, the first major company to take retail investing online.
Yeah.
Dave was CEO of the year in America in the early 2000s, and he was my mentor as he and I grew Classroom Champions together into the. That's amazing. Into the Classroom Champions has raised over Canadian dollars now, right, $80 or $90 million, and it's reached millions of kids, and it's got a great infrastructure and a great support here in Calgary too, working across. So to answer your question, yes, I've had some amazing people. Yeah. That's awesome. That have been around me, and that's the reason I'm here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's, I guess if we went and polled every athlete, there's probably a range of, some people don't, they just train their whole lives and they don't have a coach, and then suddenly they're at the Olympics, and that would be weird. And other people have support, and I think I struggled with not really having great support around me. So it was.
Were you here, born and raised here?
Well, I was almost exclusively in Alberta, so I was up in Edmonton, and then I was like similar. I was still in the athlete of the year at high school all the time, and then into university. I don't know.
Where'd you go to university?
U of A.
Okay.
And I don't. Maybe
we had a decent like the Butterdome. Yeah, I remember going to the Butterdome when I moved up here. Yeah.
We actually, it was funny. My Butterdome claim to fame story is that I literally would say that my legs were in their best condition when I was training at the Butterdome, because you could just run stairs indoors, great stairs, And Marc Messier used to occasionally run stairs, and so I met him there one time. And then what was the other guy? He was one of the he ended up fighting Muhammad Ali later. It was Dave, the cement truck. What was his? That was his nickname. Dave. Dave. Anyway, I'll figure that out. But yeah, he came out one time. And both those guys were just huge compared to me. It was so wild. Cool. Just big, barrel-chested. Mark was just like, his chest cavity was huge.
I mean, growing up in Buffalo, like you had growing up in Buffalo, you had Toronto, like Canadian culture was part of. So when I moved here, it wasn't that big of a difference.
No. That's right.
Canadian culture was part of something I grew up with. CFNY and all Toronto stations came in super clear in Buffalo, and I grew up with like Ron McLean, who Ron, like, I mean, Ron went and has been ambassador for Classroom Champions and has done some events with us, and that was always really special to me. But when I was a kid in Buffalo, I would have told you, if you surveyed like 7 or 8 year old Steve, the only hockey teams would have been the Sabres, the Leafs, and the Oilers.
Yeah.
And I grew up with Gretzky on my walls, and so when I got to meet him at the 2002 Olympics, because we were all in the same Olympic Village together in Salt Lake. All the other Olympics, we had separate villages, but to meet these guys, I saw Wayne across there. I was like, I have to go. I have to go meet the guy who I grew up to be exactly the same height. Remember those on the wall posters with a ruler next to it? I am exactly the height as Wayne on his skates.
Is that right?
Or at least I was at the time. I've shrunk a little bit since then.
As we all do.
Yes.
That's wild.
Yeah, so to do that.
Yeah, I was in Edmonton during the era of the Champions area, where they had the Eskimos, where they won everything, Grey Cups, and then of course the Oilers had won everything.
They won a few things here.
Yeah, so that was a good time.
Yeah, so I bet.
Yeah, so a question I don't want to forget to ask is, when you look at doing bobsled, and then you say, and I think this is coming from, I think that a lot of athletes that are amazing sprinters, which also might include even a football player, can get into bobsled. Like there's that high speed ability to push off the line.
Yeah.
Is that like, that's this, and then how do you train for that? Like, is it just high speed, burst of speed right off the... Yeah. There's no endurance whatsoever.
No endurance. You are not hitting that system. I had a conversation with a kid just the other day who reached out to me on LinkedIn, who is from Buffalo, or he goes to school. He goes to the University of Buffalo. And we had this conversation to answer your question, which is, he's a long jumper and a sprinter. And it's like, well, you're never going to run more than 110 meters again.
Yep.
That was conditioning. Conditioning in the spring was run a 120, walk back. Maybe 4 times. And then we actually stopped even running that far eventually. It was all football, track guys. The guys on my gold medal team, one guy played football in Nebraska, one guy played football at Air Force, and then the driver had been a ski racer. So he understood vectors and g-forces and lines and speeds. And then I was a track athlete at University of Florida. So it was, they are bobsledders in general. And, you think of the Jesse Lumsden, people like that. They are, in essence, people who couldn't quite get to, because you don't grow up trying to be a bobsledder. That's just not an accessible sport. And you can't do it until your body is matured. It's a sport that would destroy you as a child.
Right.
So it's people who, again, they couldn't quite catch the ball, or they couldn't quite run the pattern, or they couldn't quite do something in their sport that was the difference between them being great to the excellence they wanted.
Right.
But the way that they run, the way they sprint, the power that they brought transferred into bobsled real well.
Yeah, that's wild, actually. So when, it's fascinating to me. All sports are pretty fascinating because every sport has nuance. And, like as an athlete, you would think, someone on the outside is going to look at bobsled and it's like, okay, well, what do you run a little bit and then you sit down? But, like you don't train for 10 years. And that's, the total amount of what's going on. Like there's nuance to it. Like there's the way you do certain things. There's the way you lean. There's got to be thinking involved. So what's, like when you're training for bobsled, what does it look like? What's the training schedule? Don't let out any secrets.
There are no more secrets at this point in life around these things. It is... Training for bobsled is, look, whether you're training for bobsled, whether you're training for track and field, whether you're training to be whether you are or training to be a CEO, whether you are, a top-ranked musician, like the skills, it's part of what Costume Champions is about, is there's this ubiquitous set of skills.
Yeah.
And the ability to, the more that you can understand what your goal is, that is, crucial. And sport is it's kind of clear in some ways. Once you get to the super top, it gets really clear. When you're lower, the goal, well, do you want to go to university? Do you want to go to the national team? Do you want to make it to the Olympics? The goals aren't so clear, actually.
Yeah.
The goal is to get better. And sometimes that's enough. But ultimately, if you don't have that North Star, it's hard. Just the same thing of, or do you want to sell your company? Like, you run a company, you started a company, and I'd ask you, like, what's your goal here?
There has to be an end. There has to be an end to it. You can't do it forever.
Yeah.
So, we have, our business has 36-month goals that everyone knows about. And then we have a series of longer-term goals that are less shared, but they're, So we have these immediate goals and then longer-term.
And how about for you? Like, what's your goal? Personally?
I'm about 10 years and then I'm out. Like, I have about 10 years more energy. And then, it might be 12, but or it might be 8. But it's to, just to spend a lot more time in the Caribbean. And, that's my goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and pass it on, really. It's like to, I talked to this one lady who was in staffing up in Edmonton. I can't remember her name just off the hop. But she, when I talked to her years ago, she was already quite old. And she said, I want to be the Colonel Sanders of the staffing industry. So it was an interesting goal for her, and it was, a little ambiguous. But it was cool that she thought that way. And I think most of us that have been in the staffing business for a long time, we kind of see there's a certain legacy that we leave. And I think the other interesting part about it too is, and it's maybe what, a great coach sees the nuance of motion, and physical motion. And then on a business side, a great coach is going to see the nuance of how to break down what you're doing and what your business is doing and say, how do we get better at each of the nuances? And that turns into a great skill and ability for any of the people that you work with. So
and so for me, it's the original question is what makes these great bobsledder, what makes these great people, and ultimately, again, I think it's like goals. And being really clear, I would, the woman who wants to be Colonel Sanders of the industry, what does that mean to her? Like, what does that mean? And I think that this is one of the things that I've learned in life in general, people are really bad at this. Well, I have a goal. What's the goal? To sell the company. Oh, okay. Because the challenge is, how many people do you know who have sold their company that are unhappy?
Yeah. Usually it's because that sale opportunity occurs at a time when you hadn't planned it, and it's not part of the process. I would push back on that and say that I know a lot of people who sold it exactly on plan, and they're still not happy. I know people who, and I say this from a lived experience of like, look, I won a gold medal.
There's not many. There's not many more specific, targeted, fulfilling kind of things, especially as a former athlete yourself or current athlete yourself. And I have competed in the Olympics with 6 guys. One of them won a gold medal, and one of them didn't. So it can't be the medal.
Yeah,
can't be the medal. I've experienced depression at the bottom of the tail tip of do I take 5 steps in front of the train depression. And I feel very fortunate. I've been able to experience life on both ends of the spectrum. I've been able to win an Olympic gold medal, which is about the top of human accomplishment and joy and fulfillment and success. No, then there is no more questions. And the answer is yes. Very quickly, you have to get to why.
Yeah.
And that's changed my life 6 years ago or so in that way. But ultimately, I think anybody who's successful, like being able to set a goal really, really specifically is so important.
Yeah.
And know what you're going and know what it's going to do for you ultimately. And I think that's the challenge that people have is I want to win the gold medal. People get to win the gold medal and then they're not happy. They feel unfulfilled. And this is the constant goal treadmill that we know, right? You get to this and you want the next thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately that can't just be the way it works. Yeah. It can't be. So I'm really passionate about helping people set the goal of, all right, I want to be out in 10 years. I want to sell the company. All right, what do you want that to do for you? And get really specific on how to do that. And I think that there's a roadmap to get there. And I'm writing a book right now that it is amazing when you give up the seat that you're in, the amount of clarity and creativity that can actually enter your brain. I didn't quite recognize the buzz that was in the back of my head that is running a business and being a founder of a business and being a CEO of a company where you wake up in the middle of the night and your brain goes to it. Yeah. You wake up in the morning, your brain goes to it. You wake up, you're at your kid's soccer game, your brain goes to it. You lay down at night, your brain, and it is a very all-consuming, isolating thing. And when you have the opportunity to separate from that, whether it's on vacation, you actually can separate from it because you really usually can't as a CEO or a president. Right. Yeah. It's not really actually possible. Yeah. It is, for me, it's been a really freeing thing. And that's
ultimately the book and the coaching practice all goes around helping people in your roles.
Then also actually perform better because I can look back at, honestly, like the sport experience that we had. Here's the beauty, Craig, from like the thing that I got to go through that so few of us get to go through. And it's just, I feel so privileged and fortunate that I got to do this, which was going into those last few years of my career. There was one goal, win the Olympics. Yeah. The U.S. hadn't won the Olympics in 62 years, so it was a giant, ambitious goal.
Is that right?
It had been 62 years at that point.
Wow.
And all 4 of us on the team, no one was worrying about their next job. No one was worrying about their next promotion. No one was worried about all 4 of us were effectively single. No one was worrying about their mortgage, their kids. And then we had a support staff and team who did a really great job of, when they were with us, ensuring that was the only thing they were focused on too. Right. And it's Disneyland. Whether my feedback is right or wrong, whether you like it or not, doesn't matter. The intention is, I need you to be at your best.
Yeah, fully invested.
Yeah, that's right. So there was no hard feelings when the feedback would come. And if there were, they got dismissed just like that.
Sure.
And as a leader, that's the reason why goals are important. And having that North Star is important, both as a leader, but also in your own life. Because that's such a great example that doesn't exist otherwise. I talk to military guys, Navy SEALs. They're out on a mission that exists, but they come back to the base and what do? They have to call home to make sure the check cleared. They have to check on the kids. They have other things that consume them that are good and healthy in life. But what happens when you actually don't have those things for a few years and you can focus? What happens is you can beat the Germans who hadn't lost ever. The driver we beat had 4 gold medals, and now he has 4 gold medals and a silver. Wow. And when I was going through depression, I had realized I kind of lost that in me for a few years. I had 3 or 4 years of just flat. Yeah. I just wasn't improving.
Was it a issue of, not to take away from it, but was it an issue of, had you lost your why? Like sometimes people say goal, but it's also like the reason to exist. In French, raison d'être. And it's why. There's a lady, I saw only a small portion of a clip on YouTube, and they get hit from, because we have social media, and it's like, whoa, you're supposed to be beautiful, and you're also supposed to be rich, and you're also supposed to be really fit, and it's just like, oh my goodness, I don't know what my goal is anymore, and I'm just getting bombarded by possible goals.
Yeah, I think yes. I think your answer, yes. It's my why was lost, but again, I bring back why, purpose, values to goals. Why is just too existential for the human brain to actually wrap their hands around. Yeah. Purpose is also too vague. To values, your values will change. Yeah. Values are contextual around the goal. Yeah. Your systems, take James Clear, and I saw him post something relatively recently of high performers don't focus on the goal, they focus on the system. Bullshit. The system is only in place for a goal. Yeah. We're trying to over-engineer it for people, and I think that is the is again, the people I work with, the first and foremost thing is like, what's the goal? Let's help you identify your lifestyle goals, your career work goals, your relationship goals, your health goals, and then have some. My kids are. I'm old. I'm an older parent. My kids are younger. I got a 3-year-old right now and a 7-year-old, but. The 3, right? We're still changing poopy diapers right now. He's having a hard time with the whole concept. Stubborn, which I can appreciate.
It's good.
Yeah, Axe. I love you, Axe. I love you. We're going to get there. But ultimately, I want to be able to do things with him when he's 16 or 17. I'll be 60. Yeah. And that's important to me. So it gives me a goal to get after. Yeah. And then it comes back to when I think about my day on the couch going into bobsled. Like, I had to get really self-aware. Yeah. Really self-aware, and I had to realize I had to do things differently. And that was what happened coming out of bobsled. That was what happened when I came out of depression. I just had to do things differently. So I help people get really self-aware to a degree that, especially as men, we're highly uncomfortable with. Yeah. Highly uncomfortable with. But it works. Yeah. Because ultimately that's the only way that you're going to get better.
Yeah. Did you... mental illness is, it's fascinating, really. Did you, when you were there, do you see yourself in it, or do you only recognize it from looking back and say that, this is a hyperbole, but on this date I went into this. This is when it happened, and on this date I came out of the fog? Or was it gradual? Did you know you're in it, or do you only know you're in it because you can look back and say, "Whoa, that was a terrible time"?
When you're in true clinical depression, you know you're in it. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was a long journey in that we didn't. My wife and I didn't quite. We could look back and see. Yeah, it was probably things weren't great for a few years going into it. Yeah. But there were, and for me, there was a bunch of confounding things that really helped push me off the edge. I was. So Classroom Champions we were kind of stuck. Yeah, there's this like small business number of like $2 million a year revenue that it's like this hump to get over. Yeah. And we'd been there for a few years. And it was just, every January you had seasonal affect here in Calgary. You don't get sun. I was looking about 6 months out. Are we going to be able to hit payroll? Yeah. Are we going to, what's next year's things that are going to be able to do? I was on the Olympic Committee's board of directors, U.S. Olympic Committee board of directors, which if you're an Olympic fan. Larry Nassar, USA Gymnastics. I was on the board of directors of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Yeah. 15-person board. So it was all of that comes right up. Stuff flows uphill when things go really, really bad. So all of that. I had just been reappointed, so I was getting drugged through the mud publicly. As being an athlete rep on the board, we uncovered these things that were happening to athletes, and I got reappointed. So I was getting drugged through the mud publicly. And all that stuff just came all at the same time. Yeah. And there was some moments where I'm up at 5 a.m. to work out, wake up, come downstairs, and I would just be on the couch crying in a puddle. And my wife would find me. And you'd be at work and you just can't make decisions. And you remember when if you've been hurt before as an athlete, that's the best analogy I can make. Is that for me, it was like depression for me was like being told to go to the line and sprint when I had a hamstring tear. Right. Like, well, I can't. Yeah. Well, go.
But there's so much of you that's saying you should and you can, but then you just can't.
And you just have to. Like societally, you have to. Yeah. I was CEO of a small growing company. Right. If I cease and desist for 2 months, it does not continue. Yeah. like
the
you know
machine
this.
stops. The conveyor belt just
there was no true machine yet. It was not self-propelling yet. The flywheel wasn't strong enough to keep going. So all of those things, and it was so to your question of when did I know it was happening? It was right around then, and so went to the doctor and said, like, I think we've got a problem, and I knew him well enough, and he knows that I'm not a big fan of medication and all those things. So he had me fill out a little form. Yeah. Vividly remember sitting in his office, in his old offices, filling out his form. Dr. Hussein did a great job. And here in Calgary, I will promote him to no end. Poor guy just had stomach cancer last year. Had his stomach removed, and he made it through.
Wow.
Yeah, made it through. He has no stomach, and it's science.
That's wild.
Yeah, and he gives me this thing to fill out. He comes back, he looks at it, he puts it down gently. He goes, okay, so we're going to start you on this, and I'm going to give you some of these. So he started me on like an anti-anxiety, plus he had, I will forget what it is, but you put it underneath your tongue. And I think that for me, soon thereafter, I was out in Ontario with a friend and a mentor of mine, a guy named John Berardi, who founded Precision Nutrition, and he sold it for 9 figures. And JB is brilliant and awesome and a good friend, and we started talking about mental health stuff, and he started talking about his issues, and I had never heard him talk about his issues. And at that point, we still weren't in the mental health revolution, and people like me still were not quite talking about those kinds of things. Yeah. And he started talking about it, and actually, it really helped me think about it in a way of when I tell my story about being an athlete. I mean, I told you about being hurt for 5 years. Yeah. Did that diminish your feeling about my athleticism?
No. It just in some ways it's an indication of barriers or hurdles that you have to overcome in order to carry on.
Precisely. Yeah. And once I was able to frame it that way for myself and realize, look, if somebody wants to, for what I've done at this point, and it's also, I'm in a privileged position to say that I can talk about mental health because let me, another question. The overweight young man who's in his 20s who plays video games every day and is depressed. When you hear that analogy, what's your judgment?
Well, I think societally we would probably generally say they're lazy. They've been brought up poorly. Our system has failed them. They don't have goals.
But when somebody who's accomplished some things, who has an Olympic gold medal, who built an organization that is still sustainable 15 years later, is reaching millions of kids and has raised close to $100 million at this point, who sat on big boards, who when I talk about it, what's your...
Yeah, that's a story of, the theme story of overcoming. It's it's brave, rising to the, people rising to the moment. And,
right, and they say it's vulnerable. I don't, this is still the guy in me, right? I don't love the word vulnerable. It's transparent. Because I think ultimately vulnerability means if you will say or do something that has an opportunity to harm you, you're vulnerable. That's right. Like if somebody has a gun and you go ahead, you're vulnerable. Somebody has a gun and you run behind a big metal thing, you're not vulnerable anymore.
Right. You may be transparent.
You may be, yes, you may be transparent, and then you're a different thing. And so I think for me, JB helped me, and he's a successful guy who, also like a bodybuilder, all these things, and successful and wealthy and great family and all these things, and just a thoughtful human being who I'm very fortunate to talk about the people who lifted me up in the past. Yeah. He was our nutritionist back in the 2000s. And it helped me realize that it's going to make me a better leader. It's going to make me a better parent. It's going to make me a better coach. It's going to, if I can talk about these things, it gives permission for maybe just like the next level. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't give permission to the 23-year-old kid on the couch.
Right.
But maybe it gives permission to the next level. Right. And then the next level. And I think you can only help people with things that you've exposed yourself to.
Right.
And since I've had this opportunity to expose myself to both ends of joy and the bottom, I'm able to converse with folks who are struggling, because it's being an entrepreneur or being a leader is really effing really hard.
Yeah.
And it is, you're isolated in so many ways that people just don't quite get.
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah. Like
people don't get that at all.
Right? Like, I mean, everybody around you needs something from you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and no matter how you trust it with your staff who are listening to this, I apologize, but it is the reality.
Yeah.
They still need you and they still depend on you, because if you decide that you do not, if your decision matrix is that they do not need to be here anymore, they have a hard time feeding their kids. Their life is in jeopardy. And if you're at a big enough company and you have a board above you, you can only go to them with certain things because you can't be seen as that. So I've really enjoyed the ability to connect with the folks in those roles, and also ultimately to help them, what we talked about earlier, like the details and like how you navigate these things and how you lift yourself back up and how you handle your team and all those things. So it's been really
I love the whole idea of goals, and I guess when I was younger, back when everything was on a cassette tape or whatever.
Yeah.
And, Zig Ziglar was like one of the greatest speakers back then.
Yeah.
And I think people copy a lot of his stuff. And he has one bit that he does. They're almost like bits, like they're like shorts. Mm-hmm. And he does one bit
he
where
would crush it today.
Oh, yeah. He talks about working with this world champion archer. And he says to the archer, I'm totally paraphrasing this now, but he says, that's the target. I want you to shoot at that target, but I need you to do it blindfolded. And the guy says, how am I going to do it blindfolded? And Zig says, well, just shows you can't hit a target you can't see. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting. And Zig talks about goals all the time. It's like such a big part of what he talked about. But it would be interesting now to say, is the perception in our society of what goals are, is it different than what it was 40 years ago? Like, do we see goals differently? And as we said earlier, like, we have this barrage of what we should be attaining, and like, it's, well, I need to have a Bentley and I need to have a boat. And like, and a lot of it's pretty fake. Mm-hmm. And so the kid sitting on the couch, maybe he's overloaded now. Like, he's seen every goal. And now at this point, well, I'm never going to own a 60-foot yacht and have a bunch of beautiful women tending to my needs. It's just not going to happen. So I'm just going to give up now, rather than even trying to have a goal. So I wonder, that would be an interesting look at reality and see how hard it is to get. And I find it hard now to get people to establish goals and live up to those goals, because a lot of people just say, well, I'm going to make $1 million. That's what you want me to say, right? I'm going to make $1 million. I'll just do it.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't happen.
It's such a great point. It's a great question. It would be great to see like what people's goals were back then. But ultimately, I think the thing that I've learned too, though, is it's that bobsled example of, right, everybody was all in on that goal.
Yeah.
Everything about their lives. And great, you can set a goal and kind of like, and whatever. But man, I can tell people, and I can tell you, like, if you want to do something, and then either decide you're going to do it or don't do it. Mm-hmm. Like, either decide, and when you decide, then you have to be able to move all in on doing it, because if you don't, and you don't reach it, you have no idea if you were capable or not. No idea. But if you do put everything into it, and you sell out to get after it, and do it, and bet on yourself, and you don't make it, the satisfaction of knowing that you tried it and that you gave it everything you can and you couldn't gives you so much confidence in learning for the next thing that you do. But if you don't put everything into it, you don't learn anything, because you don't know what it was that caused you not to accomplish the goal. Yeah. And that is where so many people miss the mark on trying to live their lives, accomplish their goals, and again, this works from sports to business to other parts, to relationships, to your own mental
child rearing,
to your own mental health. Is make the decision. And I've been fortunate to have to make those decisions a few times in my life and make those transitions. And I'm in the middle of a transition right now where I bet on myself to do this. And part of that is like going all in and continuously learning about what I need to be doing. I'm playing with Instagram right now. Great example. Mm-hmm. I look at the stuff that I'm creating on Instagram right now, and I don't really like any of it. Yeah. I don't really like any of it. But I know that the only way I can possibly get to the point where I like what's on there is going through this process.
Yeah.
It is like if you release your product and you look back on it and you don't feel a little bit ashamed of it, you waited too long.
I've heard that a few times recently.
And we realized that with Costume Champions. We realized that with trying new push techniques back in bobsled. You have to be willing to tinker and you have to be willing to quote unquote fail. But none of these things are actually failures. Like, what's a failure? It's either you didn't learn from it or it killed you. Yeah. Short of that, it's simply just somewhere between an inexpensive and an expensive lesson.
Yeah, that's right.
For yourself. Yeah. So I know as we're growing this thing, and I've got a great kid, Nevin, who helps do the production and do these other things on there, because I don't have the amount of time it takes to do it. But what's been really fascinating is I generally went off social media for 10 plus years.
Wow. At
the Vancouver Olympics, I was the fourth most followed athlete at the Vancouver Olympics. It was like Shaun White, Apollo Ono, Lindsey Vonn, and me.
Wow.
Somebody saw my account and liked me and started putting me on a bunch of the lists back then. I had, I think, like 50 or 60,000, 75,000 followers back then. Barely any more now on there. But then there was nothing to do on social media back then, really.
Yeah.
And, Instagram, these other things were my friends. And it was just only this past December, January, where I realized, okay, I'm writing a book, and the agency is, the book agent I have for it is, I'm really excited about it. Again, it is the framework for my coaching, the way that I work with people, and it is helping so many people right now that I work with, and my hope is that it's gonna help so many people.
Does it have a working title? Do you have a title then?
Decoding Life's Algorithm.
Oh, so
good. It is, in essence, here's how it came down to, when you win a gold medal, Craig, everybody's like, you should write a book.
Yeah. Here's my version of that. In the, I went through, we were going to say a couple things. I went from track. I felt like I was about as good as I was going to get based on my physiology. Then I kind of got lazy a bit, and I just stayed in the gym, and I worked out all the time. Then my younger brother said, hey, we should get in some races. Let's do some mountain biking. And then I heavily invested into mountain biking, financially, mentally, time-wise. And then the kids showed up, and it's like, I'm a horrible parent now. And I didn't have the physiology for it, really, because I was too heavy, too tall.
Okay.
And for mountain biking, you have to be small and just have, it's just different. And then I just went back to the gym and kept working out. And then one friend of mine just said, you got to compete in bodybuilding. Like, you're amazing. Like, you'll win for sure. And I did. And awesome. It was an interesting experience. And I think the one thing that I've struggled with and haven't, I need to put pen to paper at some point to sort this out is, and from sport too, is I think everyone before a big event, maybe before the Olympics, and you're just about to go out and do this amazing thing, are you competing to do better than someone else? Or are you competing to be the best that you can possibly be? And in bodybuilding, it's really interesting because you're on stage with other people that are going to beat you, most likely. You can't, certainly at the last minute, you're not going to change your physiology or change your look, or you're as big as you're going to be, you're as lean as you're going to be, and that's it. And so then as you were saying, you look back and think, I should have done that one extra set of leg press. That was what did it. And I would have won. But it's interesting when you look back and you think, what could I have done a little different? And then you reevaluate going forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you are at the upper echelons, you are competing against the best that you could possibly be. And you're at this point, you're hoping that it is better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Because when you get there, the work is done.
Yeah, that's right. You can't.
The people who perform the best, whether it is, again, in the boardroom or on the track, are the ones who, they have such this deficit mindset in a lot of ways, different than a growth mindset. They do have a deficit mindset. That deficit mindset is, I need to get stronger. I need to get faster. And they spent most of their life having that feeling.
Yeah.
You strike me as that person who would have that.
Every day.
And that drives you. It gets you out of bed. It gets you moving. It's a thing that you carry with you. It doesn't make you feel good sometimes, but often it's the thing that keeps you motivated, which are also two very different mechanisms of the way our brains work. But the people who can flip the switch, and I've had this conversation with a lot of high performers, is being able to flip the switch. If you have a big board meeting and the work is done and you're about to walk in and you might quote unquote know you're not quite ready, your mindset has to be that you're ready.
Yeah, that's
because not being ready is you can't do anything about it. It's not within your control.
Yeah.
At the Olympics in Vancouver, I actually said, they asked me at the press conference the Friday before, the day of maybe the Thursday before opening ceremony, so it was about 2 weeks before we were going to race. They knew they'd get a good answer from me. They asked about the 62-year drought. And I said, it's a funny feeling to walk into the Olympic Games knowing that if we do our jobs, we can win.
Right.
And the guys turned and looked at me because you don't say those things.
Yeah.
You don't say that.
Yeah.
You're going to win the Olympics. But the nuance is I didn't say we were going to win. I said if we do our jobs, we can win. Yeah. And it was the if we can do our jobs thing because that was what we can control.
Yeah.
We couldn't control whether our training was good enough.
And who shows up.
And all those kinds of things. You can't control any of those things. So it's focusing on control. That's another big part of the book is focusing on control. And you said something else that, let's go back 1 second to round off the Instagram thing. It's really an amazing platform these days. It's been fascinating to start to learn it. And actually the amount of people who are reaching back out to me now from all over the world is what I was hoping for out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Classroom Champions reaches hundreds of thousands of kids on an annual basis. I wanted to do that for adults now again and get back into it. I went into leadership development consulting post bobsled, pre going to work at Classroom Champions and deciding that I didn't want to hire somebody, deciding I just wanted to go and grow it. And my sister, who I started with, who has her PhD in education, is the smart one. I was the one stupid enough to go, and I'm going to go and grow this charity.
Yeah.
And it's really neat to see what the platform's doing now. And again, I'm uncomfortable constantly on there, which is such a both awful and wonderful feeling because I understand now what awful feeling means, what the pain of that means.
Right.
And the pain of that means something good is going to come.
Yeah.
It's going to. And just be consistent and drive through it. But I think, you said some stuff with, I struggle with. And honestly, like Craig, when I think about those kinds of things, it's like, how do you help people? When I hear somebody say, I struggle with X, I attack that.
Yeah.
Or you hear a lot of people say, I am just this way. I need this. I need this to bring it back to a sport. I need this to happen to compete. I need to get my blank in before I compete.
Right.
I need to get this in before I, perform at work. And any time that you have some needs that are not things that are fully in your control, sometimes you can't control whether you actually have the time or this or that to actually do those things. That's the place for growth. It's you actually can change the way that you think about that and just we go through a process to get somebody to the point where nothing bothers them. And they don't need anything other than themselves in the moment to be able to rise up and step up and do it. And like, there's all these great ways, but the best trick I can give people out there is pick something that really bothers you, but is benign. Great example for me personally is the news.
Yeah.
Decent topic these days. Bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
There is a certain character in America these days who tends to be all over the news, everywhere. Any app you open up, any podcast you open up, they're talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of people's skin crawl. What a great opportunity. It's a triggering
to a
thing.
lot of people.
Follow your triggers.
Yeah.
Pay attention to your triggers, respect your triggers, and then learn how to diffuse them. Because if you still have a trigger and you're still being triggered by something, it means you either haven't dealt with something or you haven't processed something, or you just have to at some point realize you might not be able to do those things. And you have to just put it away.
Right.
So a great way to do that is, again, practice with something that's not in your job, that's not in your sport. And I work with some of the athletes on this too, is if you can actually get to the point where, for me, news, I'm now to the point where I can, with the ADHD that I have, I need at night to wind myself down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I do read, and I do the thing that I don't love, which is like I read in bed, and I will have my phone in black and white and dim, and I'll read there. I'll read the news.
Yeah.
I'm to the point now where I can read about what Donald Trump did last night and turn my phone off and go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I never could do that. That used to rile me up. I grew up in a household where my dad yelled at the nightly news almost every night. And that was how I thought you dealt with the news.
Yeah.
And all of these things. And part of that for me was being in a position of power at the U.S. Olympic Committee in the middle of the crisis with Larry Nassar. You realize that even when you're in a position of control, like on that board in the middle of the Me Too movement, in the middle of the gymnastics scandal, you realize how little control you actually have.
Yeah.
So me in my house here in Calgary have no control over what's happening out there on the news. And therefore, what a great exercise to desensitize myself to it and be able to, and there's again a bunch of steps to get there for yourself. But boy, oh boy, if you can do that, because you had to do that on the line at the Olympics. Mm-hmm. You never knew what was going to happen, and you only had one chance.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, you only had one shot. And luckily I had a few shots, but you never know when you get another chance. And I think that is such like what you said there is so powerful for people to hear, that even somebody in your position who's running a company, who's driving a podcast, who's doing all these things and has been successful at bodybuilding and successful at sports, and even you struggle with things, it's a really powerful signal to send.
You know, it causes me to think of, I was talking with a sleep therapist one time, and he said one thing, it was there's probably 100 tools. The one thing that stuck with me was when you're trying to fall asleep, and you know how he said you have two things that you have to deal with when you're trying to sleep. One is that things you can control, and one is things you cannot control. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you acknowledge what is what, you'll go to sleep really fast. Yeah. And so, if the tap is leaking, you can control that, get out of bed, control it, right? But if there's a noise outside in the street and you can't control it, acknowledge that you can't control it, and your brain will put you to sleep. It's wild. Like, really, and I've kind of lived with that. It's really powerful.
And there's all kinds of things within, like the dopamine cycles and processes of how we engage with all that stuff that's tapped into all of those things, and it's really like
it's fascinating.
It's part of the algorithm that goes from what's your goal. Like, the input is your goal, just like any other algorithm. And again, algorithm, thinking of it in a way of like a social media algorithm. Yeah. Where some people think of algorithm as a math equation that has a finite beginning and end.
Right.
A social media algorithm does not. It has a source code that is, think about at the Social Network, the movie, The Social Network, about Mark Zuckerberg, and the guy goes into the clean room to look at the source code because it is an untouchable, private thing. Right. And our source code comes from our biology and from our evolution, and then from our personal experiences that we have that are unchangeable. You cannot change the experience you had yesterday.
That's right.
It is there. It's part of your source code now.
You can reframe it.
You can reframe it. You can do these things, but it happens.
It exists as a reality.
The code is there. It's there. So that is our clean room. Yeah. But then you have thousands of people that work at Meta who are out there tweaking the rest of the algorithm. Yeah. They're in their own little fiefdoms tweaking it. There's literally only a few people at Meta, and a good friend of mine who I put on the U.S. Olympic Committee board before I left, and I chaired the nominating governance committee, a guy named James Higa, who is like one of the smartest people I've ever met. He was with Jobs from like 83 and onwards at Apple. When Jobs had to leave Apple, James left, and James actually ran the Asian company that Steve had.
No way.
And then he came back with Apple, and I met him at this Social Innovation Summit, early 2010s, probably early in Costume Champions, maybe probably even before I was working there full time. And I called James because I had some questions around algorithms. Yeah. I said, explain to me, how does this work?
That's so cool.
You know what we're doing. Like, one of his business partners at his fund now is Marin. Oh, I can't remember his first name. But he worked on the Facebook. He basically built the Facebook Connect platform.
Wow.
He went on and built another social media platform that Google offered $100 million for. They didn't take it, and it wound up falling apart. Figure out this social media problem. And he said, tell me about algorithms. And James said, here's the thing. Because I had an idea about plugging some of these. Here's the thing. Maybe there's a handful of people at Meta that actually understand how this work at this point. Yeah. I said, what do you mean? Like, I would think there's thousands of people working on the code. How do they not know how the algorithm works? Yeah. Said they don't. Wow. Because it's gotten so complicated now. And there's millions of levers. So they're going to move this because they're trying to increase engagement and trying to increase you to do this and this and this. So they have all these things. The problem is they move one lever that has like little continuums. Right. Basically, here's an end, and we're going to move this one. Challenge is there's that little move might have a rippling, cascading effect across 100, and no one really knows how that works.
Right.
And maybe somebody's in a pocket of 100 of them, and that's where the book idea came from.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's how life works.
Yep.
I'm going to over-index on bodybuilding a little bit. What's that going to do to your relationships?
Yeah.
What's that going to do? Because the ripple effects of going to bodybuilding, I have to spend more time in the gym, maybe a little bit less time away from my kids. Then I have to do stuff to make up for the time with my kids. And then, oh, by the way, I'm going to become like a little bit more attractive to other things. And how's my spouse going to feel about that?
Not possible.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, you are at the top end. You've topped it off. You've topped it off. So like, how's that going to affect your life?
Yeah.
And then, how's your spouse's jealousy going to be on that one? Because now you go out and she sees that more people are looking at you because now you're a little buffer. And a little more, so there's all these things that happen. And ultimately, that's the book. What the book is about is getting to the point where you understand what goal you have. The input's the goal.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. What are you trying to accomplish? And then get really self-aware, get some real great situational awareness, understand where these things come from in you, your evolutionary source code, your like the experiences you've had, understand what you can control as you start to move forward, understand like where your energy comes from to accomplish, to deal with all of these things. Is it, sleep and diet and exercise, and as well as your mental health and all these things that plug in. Then ultimately, what decisions are you going to make? Right. Because at 100,000, based on all of that. Based on all that, because at 100,000 feet, life is pretty simple. Here's the goal I have. Here's the goal I have, and here's the end point. From 100,000 feet, it's just it's like line. a little wiggly there.
Yeah.
Then you zoom down to 50,000 feet, and you got a few more things happening. But we live at street level.
Yeah.
We're looking out of our eyes, which means for us, it is a giant Plinko board from The Price is Right.
I thought it was going here to here. I'm way over here today.
I actually
I'm not
have
even
to,
on the map.
It's just a giant binary tree, and like there's one slot 10 years out there that I have to hit to get the exact goal, and then the ones next to it I'd be pretty happy with.
Yeah.
And that is and then all the decisions you have to make, all of them. Am I going to get up and work out today? Because that decision you didn't make today, well, boy, oh boy, guess what? The market took a crash.
Yeah.
And then all these things happen. You have to make decisions, but you didn't work out today. You didn't get a good night's sleep. And all that leadership training that you had is out the window because you're not emotionally regulated. So it is such a fascinating thing.
There's a friend of mine. He's I can't remember the guy's name, but he's talking to it's an online coaching environment, and one of the things that he said is, and it stuck with me, is that he's got these non-negotiable situations. Like there are things that you make a commitment to, non-negotiable. That's just your go forward.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the gym. I'm always going to get up and go to the gym. That's my non-negotiable.
Okay.
So it was interesting. It's an interesting thought. And he gets into social media. Like he has a commitment to social media posting, to networking, to like it's interesting non-negotiables.
Yeah. And I've heard people use those before. And I got sucked into that way of thinking for a little while.
Yeah. What happens? Like, is it too hard to stick with it, or is it what happens?
Yeah. The reason that I don't like people if that works for people, awesome, use it, leverage it, go. But every now and then you won't do it.
Yeah, and then there's
a guilt complex that happens there, and then. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's I help people create checklists.
Yeah,
the gym in the morning, getting out of bed when that alarm goes off. Now my alarm goes off at like 4:50.
Yeah,
so I was finding myself.
Mine too.
I was I was finding myself, I needed an extra little bit of time in the morning.
Yeah.
So the kids are young, and I feel like need to be able to help a little bit more. And it's not just my wife's job to do all the things, as much as she does most of the things.
We try.
Is basically creating a ton of different whys, a ton of different goals.
Yeah.
So I have goal clarity, but I also have a lot of different goals. I want to be more. My hardest workout of the week was this morning. Because I wanted to be ready to go, and I have go to a client this afternoon, and I want to be able to have a good conversation with you.
Yeah.
So I went out this morning and crushed like a Bex Gentry Peloton 45-minute interval run on the road.
Beautiful.
It was great. So I set my week up around those things every single time. But when that alarm goes off, some days you don't need to focus as much. So the reason to focus, that's out the window.
Yeah.
Then you think like, well, I want to be able to beat Axel at skiing when he's 16 and I'm 60. That's too far away today.
Yeah.
That one's out the window.
Yeah.
But working out early and getting up and doing something hard makes the other hard things you have to do easier. It lowers what's called your limbic friction, which is an Andrew Huberman concept, which is in essence limbic friction is the idea of what is it that the person who gets off the couch and the person who doesn't, what is the both physical and mental friction there that's causing that. And the limbic system is the thing that wants you on that couch because we are built to survive, not thrive.
Yeah.
And conserving energy is a big part of our limbic system. It is meant to be there. So that's getting over that limbic friction. So if you do that hard thing in the morning, that hard conversation you have to have later is easier.
Yeah.
Doing that paperwork later is easier because you did the hard thing. And boom, I've got some paperwork I don't want to do today. Boom, that's the reason. So I have a mental checklist that I help people with. What are all the reasons why? And you better have more than one or two.
Yeah.
You need to have a lot in life, the important thing. So I don't deal, to me, I think non-negotiables, again, if it works for people, I do not, like, a placebo is way more powerful than an actual medicine if the placebo is doing a better job for you.
Sure.
Period.
Yeah.
So in this case, have that checklist and give yourself all the reasons why you need to have that difficult conversation with your spouse. Make it more than one reason, because if it's only one reason, maybe it's not that important for you to actually do it in that way. So that's how I think about that.
I like that. I really love that idea, and I think I embrace that idea of doing hard things, like intentionally doing them and finding things that are hard so you can experience it. And in business, it comes and goes, but we oftentimes find that people who have been competitive in something, and that could be in sport or educationally or even quilting or some hobby where they take it so seriously that they really engage with it. Those hard things that those people do does translate into general, like everything you do. You can just do a little more.
And honestly, it's one of the things that high performers struggle with the most because they've seen themselves performing at their best.
Right.
And whether you're an athlete or a business leader who stops being competitive or moves into a different industry or sells their company, and then you're living your life in a different way, and you know what peak performance for you looks like, and then you know that you're not living it. And that, when I reflect upon the guys that I've buried, I think that really was a big part of it. You would call it the platitude, is they couldn't find a place for that passion. That's the platitude. But platitudes are just that. You can't understand a platitude per se. It's just this vague thing left to the imagination.
It is.
But actually digging into it and experiencing it myself and digging into it with others, which is, I wasn't performing. I wasn't doing things at my best. So finding some things, and sometimes it's work, and sometimes it's just picking up something else and just getting really nerdy about it, and getting into it and learning about
deep
it.
Deep
dive, and just become an expert. There's a whole lot of mechanisms that happen when we become experts at things, or we try. And that was my leadership philosophy. It came from a guy named Dan Pink, did this TED Talk back in the early 2010s, and it was based on some work that economists did in research, but ultimately it was autonomy, mastery, and purpose for your people. And that was that was my leadership, three legs of the stool, which is autonomy. I believe that people can and would and should work in the styles and ways that work for them, that if you give them that trust, and there's all these signals that happen, and mastery that give them the ability to get really good at something, because your confidence goes really well if you are a master of something. And then purpose, both in the company, how does your work help the person next to you? And then how does your work help the world? And that was always the thing I hoped for our people. And it turns out there's a lot of research on the other side of mental health, which is people that are high in levels of goal persistence, self-mastery, and positive reappraisal.
Interesting.
Those three things, people have material less anxiety and depression, which are actually happen to be connected to those things as well. So it's the nuance of all of the mental health and the leadership side stuff, and digging into it has become really a big purpose, a big goal for me. That's brought a lot of joy, and getting that Olympic level detail of knowing, because when you're trying to win the Olympics and you're in a sport that's about the hundredths, every single tiny little detail matters. Or you have to pick the details that matter. And as a leader, you can't deal with all the details, but you got to have a few that you really give a shit about. And those are the ones that you go really deep on.
Stay with those.
We all have those.
Here's interesting. You go through the Olympic experience. The day after, do you look and think, either did you leave anything on the table? Could you have done better? And then, or was your initial reaction, no, I can't even believe I did that well. the gods were on my side. And then 5 or 10 years later, do you watch it on TV and think, I could beat them? Does that ever come up?
Yes, and I am 100% certain I left it all on the table.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is such a nice feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so satisfying. It's what I talked about earlier. Go all in and do it, and just do it, and leave it all out there, and put yourself out there, and don't protect yourself. And the reason so many people don't do things is they're protecting themselves from getting hurt, from losing, from embarrassment, from all those things. And you learn so much. In 2006, we fell on our faces, and I was 7th, and we were supposed to medal. And the article that was written about me was like very transparent by the same Buffalo News guy I talked about earlier. So yeah, I get to look back, and we also won by a ton too.
Yeah.
Like, we won by more than anybody won by for multiple Olympics. But I felt the same way after I handed off Classroom Champions, and I felt the same way when I left the Olympic Committee board.
Oh, that's great.
That also was part of putting me. I left everything out on the table. And it just turned into, that's just how I worked. Yeah. And there's a whole lot of things in my personal source code that taught me some lessons. Like when you watch Scott Norwood miss the field goal to lose the Bills this first Super Bowl, and then you see the entire city of Buffalo chant his name 2 days later to want to hear from him to speak, here's the 12-year-old in me learning, even if you fall flat on your face on the global stage, that the whole city depends on you, they'll still love you. That's amazing. That's interesting to learn. Yeah. And that became part of who I was. And actually, when I got inducted to the Western New York Sports Hall of Fame, Jim Kelly and a few of the other guys were there. And I got to thank them. This is what you did for me. Wow. Like, this is what you did for me, guys. Thank you. Like, oh my God, I'm a different human being because I got to watch you fail and you learn.
That's interesting message.
That's
powerful.
Such an interesting, again, like how I got to where I am and how I think about things the way I get to and the people around me. So.
We need some way to bottle up that whole idea of going all in on things, and I think more people need to feel like that's a possibility.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's tough, especially for young people.
I agree.
So, but anyways, I know you have other commitments today, so I appreciate you coming in. We're gonna have to have a whole other conversation about goal setting. How to do it,
I would love to walk your listeners through the way to do it. I mean,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
We'll do some seminars. It'll be fun. All right. Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Craig. This was great.
Thank you.